All right, this is the first of two 63 JMI AC30s in here for restoration. And this is the first one that came in. It's already had a lot of the work done, as you've seen in previous videos. But the new Vishay Dale cathode bypass resistors came in, and this has much thicker leads than the one that on that Zycon that we tipped in. And the cap's permanently in place now, and there's nice space between them because this can get relatively warm. And we want to make sure it doesn't bake this capacitor. Everything else in this section you've pretty much seen. Overall, it's sounding great. I'm very pleased with it. There's still a little bit of a buzz somewhere I'm going to track down, but more on that later. Here's some other goodies. In this area, everything's finalized as far as the brilliant and normal channels are concerned, aside from the later addition of the top boost card on the back. The owner decided to stay with the alpha for the cut circuit because it works absolutely fine, and there's no sound difference between that and some Claristat or Honeywell from the 60s, other than a cost factor of about 10 to 20 times more. And again, these mix resistors are temporary until I add in the card on the back. All this stuff is sounding quite good. Here in the Vibe trim section, you can see I've got a new depth pot and a 3 meg reverse audio pot. I still don't quite have the depth that I want in the trim in terms of the lushness of the phase, and I am going to be looking at some resistors that are all tied to a V8. Just like the output of the harmonic trim that Fender has, that thing has to be really well matched per side for all the lush, phasey goodness to shine through. And I have not yet turned my attention to that. That's all stock old resistors, I'm sure, with a lot of drift. So we'll dial that in a little bit. But first, we'll just do a little preview of the sounds as they exist now. So the Brilliant channel, which is not the same as the top boost most people know. And again, it's a relatively thin, bright channel. It sounds really good with P90s or humbuckers, but I got a Strat right now. That was neck middle on a Strat. If I go neck, it's a cool sound. It's just not very full. Remember, when this thing was designed in 1960, 61, the AC30 first came out in 59, but the AC36, like this, was a little bit down the road. People didn't have the modern concept of what electric guitars should, quote, should sound like yet. So it's kind of a guess that they certainly refined when they came out with the top boost channel. But the original non-top boost Brilliant channel is really cool, and you'll get to hear that in later real playing videos. Let's go to the normal channel, and I'm going to turn down the cut control for the normal channel because it's a much less bright channel. It doesn't have a bright cap, at least in stock form. I talked to the owner. We may add a modest one to this later. So both those channels are sounding great. That little bit of hum that you hear here, it's really modest background stuff being picked up by that channel. And it's low enough that none of it's really getting picked up in the Brilliant channel. But I got to look and see what the input wires on these channels are going next to, because it's got old shielded cable. And sometimes shielded wire itself just soaks up junk over the years. You know, it's rubber, it's plastic. It will soak up yuck, and this amp was just chock full of yuck. I probably got about 20 cups of coffee out of the amp as far as yuck goes. Very scientific measurement. Let's go to the Vibe trim channel. We're going to start in trim. A little bit of scratchiness is one of the that's related to the tube that's in there. It's not in the circuit. With a different tube, that goes away. I'll show that later. Now, like I said, this isn't going to be as deep and lush now as it will be once I finalize that channel. But something, and I will do a long video on what exactly happens on this channel, but something else to notice, the apparent rate doubles when you go from trim to vibe, because in trim you only have one oscillator at a certain speed, and in vibe you've got two oscillators working at the same speed, 180 degrees away from each other, which means that you get up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, as opposed to up, down, up, down, up, down. So trim, vibe. And it's not cut and dried, you know, bop, bop, bop versus bop, 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 because there's a phase thing, but that phase is not really defined at this point. It will be later. Okay, let's go back to the trim function. I'm going to go to minimum speed. Now I have, in addition to changing that pot, I changed one value cap, but I left the original cap in there and added a very small modern multi-layer ceramic in parallel with it, so it can be put back to stock very easily. And you know, the original 3-position switch and 3 resistors are being returned with the amp. So it goes really slow to quite fast. And in addition to the harmonic complexity being lusher and fuller when I'm done with this, the depth will actually be a little bit fuller as well, so you get a more pronounced effect. And that's not all controlled by the depth pot. The depth pot is just the user control of it. The rest of it, the circuit has to be fine-tuned, and I'll get it there. One other thing to bear in mind, let me turn the tremolo down, speed down a little bit. If I go, I'm in trim mode, I can go with max speed here and hear the effect. If I change it to vibe, the effect is lessened at that speed. It's there, it's just not as apparent. That will be another thing that I fix as I go through the circuit. But, you know, worst comes to worst, the vibe has a certain max speed, and the trim you can go a little bit faster. This is not the final sound of this. Like I said, it needs to be balanced and fine-tuned and really brought out and enhanced. Right now, the circuit is working. But the difference between the circuit working and the circuit working really, really well is kind of huge. So I'm going to get in there and do that huge stuff. Speaking of huge stuff, I almost forgot to mention, I didn't get this on video because I was doing it late at night the other night. My wife was asleep, and I didn't want to be in the other room talking. Because, when you hear it back on YouTube, it sounds sane, but in reality, I'm just talking to myself in an empty room. It's kind of weird. But, the chassis for these is in two halves. You've got the big horizontal steel chassis and this small aluminum chassis. The aluminum chassis holds the knobs and input jacks and the preamp stuff. And the big chassis holds the iron and the output tubes and all that stuff. But they are held together with 3 screws and 4 screws that hold the transformer mounting hardware together. In this case, only 3 because one is missing and the holes don't line up for the output transformer. That's a down the road kind of thing. But between the mating surfaces of the chassis was all kinds of corrosion and yuck. So I separated the 2 halves of the chassis. I was able to pull them about 1/8 of an inch apart from each other without disturbing the wiring. And I cleaned the mating surfaces of the chassis very thoroughly. And then when I put it back together, because this aluminum chassis had bent a little bit, particularly over by the AC input area, over by the power transformer, I didn't really trust the ability of the old brass hardware to pull it together and pull it straight. So the 3 screws that do chassis to chassis are now number 8 stainless steel with some stainless steel washers, stainless steel compression washers, and stainless steel nylock nuts. And that's the 3 main screws. That's separate from the additional screws where the transformers clamp everything together. So this is rock solid, and the grounds, chassis to chassis grounding improved, because you have grounds made to the steel chassis and you have grounds made to the aluminum chassis. And unless there is no resistance from the chassis to chassis, then you have less than perfect conductivity in your grounds. And that's no good. Back to the show. But I'm really pleased with how it sounds now. That's it for now.